So Tulsi Gabbard, isn't Tulsi Gabbard like the greatest person ever? She is the most courageous woman in America. Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang are my two choices so far in the Democratic primary. So Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, she's beautiful, she's wonderful, she's 37 years old, she's 1 year older than me, she'd be the youngest president, she was the youngest state legislature in all the 50 states. So Tulsi Gabbard, she is absolutely the most courageous woman in America right now. So the government is up and running, right? So I hear for the next 3 weeks. So that's great, right? Now we can get back to the business of imperializing the shit out of the world some more. So, you know, only to the tune of $700 billion. So Tulsi Gabbard is the only one who's speaking out clearly about Venezuela. She just basically said, stay the fuck up. Why the fuck are we going to go into Venezuela? Jesus Christ, have we not? I mean, my God. So recently, a lot of the islands in the Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, therefore Maduro, Antigua, and Barbuda are from Maduro, St. Lucia, Jamaica. So Jamaica's on the right side of history. St. Kitts and Nevis, Prime Minister Timothy Harris said that he wanted a sit-down because he's the leader of CARICOM. And the majority of the countries in CARICOM, which is an association of nations in the Caribbean, the majority of the countries in CARICOM do not want the U.S. to intervene into Venezuela. Now, there's a lot of people that's on Maduro's side. Maduro has some very strong allies all across the world. So Nicolas Maduro is the current president. He's just started his second 6-year presidential term. He was elected, but it was only by 49% of the population, which, shit, we accept 15%, 13%, probably 6%. We probably would just, hell, you know, old Rufus McGee, whatever the fuck he says, we'll just all organize ourselves around his mind. So, the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, the Supreme Court of Venezuela, supports Nicolas Maduro. You have the National Electoral Council that declared Maduro the winner. So he's got the executive branch, he's got the Supreme Court, and he's got the election branch. He's got three of the four branches of government. So that Juan Guaida, he only has the legislature, and he was only elected amongst the legislatures. So he wasn't elected by the people. He wasn't the elected president. How the fuck can you just declare somebody the leader who wasn't even elected president? That would be like putting Chuck Schumer into the Oval Office. He wasn't elected by the people, but you know what? Congress went ahead and elect him. They think that he's a better president, so just go along with what Congress says. A lot of countries, Syria, so that's okay. Ecuador, I've seen them on both sides. Nicaragua. So, on two lists, I'm not clear about Ecuador, but maybe Ecuador, Nicaragua, Cuba, Nicaragua, China, just fucking China. China and Russia told us to stay out. Russia said, but then they're also putting, like, military weapons and shit somewhere down there. Iran, which they don't really like us. Mexico. Bolivia. Mexico, Bolivia, all them islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua, Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, China, Russia, Turkey, Mexico, Bolivia. I trust Bolivia's judgment. There's a couple questionable characters in that list, but Bolivia is a badass motherfucking government. Mexico is just right there. We're having all this immigration problem, and they're sitting there saying that we're on the wrong side of history, so that's brave, that's brazen. And then the military, Vladimir Padrino, who's the defense minister. So Vladimir Padrino is the military. So the military is loyal to Nicolas Maduro too. So he's got the Supreme Court in his pocket. He's got the National Electoral Council in his pocket. And he's got the executive branch in his pocket. Just the body of the people, right? So the parliament is supposed to represent the people, like Congress. Congress represents us, we the people. They're supposed to be the people's body. There's also Chavistas. There's PDVSA, Venezuela Oil Company. So the oil company is loyal to Nicolas Maduro. He's got the military. He's got all these gangs called Chavistas who are just loyal to Hugo Chavez. Nicolas Maduro's carrying a saintly glow with him, so he's got himself a halo because he is the successor of Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez died, he takes power, he's elected president, and now he's been elected president again. So those are all the people that's on Nicolas Maduro's side. That's pretty formidable. He's got his own country, looks like, 4/5 of the government, of the leadership, the oil company, the military, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch. So the only branch of government that he doesn't have control over is the legislative branch. And they are, I think it's pretty much very similar because the president is the head of state and the head of government for both the U.S. and for Argentina. So I believe that the legislature, if it's similar to the, three branches division of the United States, then they can only write laws. They can only write laws. They can't sign them and they can't execute them. So the Germans, they said that the Parliament of Venezuela has the most important role. So they're saying, National Assembly, get your shit together. Juan Guaida, you're leading the National Assembly to attempt a coup d'etat. What the fuck is your problem, man? I guess Hugo Chavez tried this same shit, but then the U.S. has been meddling in Venezuela's affairs. We've blockaded them, economic sanctions, which is a precursor to war. That's basically like the first step before you just invade. We always are, we hate that they're a socialist country, so we've been fucking with them throughout, 15, 20, 30 years, 40, 50, probably since it's existed. We tried to coup d'etat their government in 2002. So, it's a shit show. It's a mess. Venezuela's a big old fucking mess. So perhaps the United Nations intervention, but the United States should just take a back seat to this. Let the United Nations take care of it, institute some elections, and get this matter all sorted out. And that's what the European Union says. We need new elections. And they did not recognize Juan Guaido, I don't know, I forgot. I didn't write it down, so, but Juan, the president of the legislative branch, which is unicameral, which is another difference between the United States and Venezuela's government. So, I've already said this before, Guaido, okay, sorry. Majority of countries that are in CARICOM do not accept Juan Guaido as the fucking president, and there's 15 members to this Caribbean group called CARICOM. So, ultimately, it's an affront to democracy. It's not constitutional. We haven't declared war on Venezuela. It's not okay with international law. And the reason why Maduro is being called a dictator is because he was given a presidential decree by the National Assembly in 2013. So he was ruling by presidential decree as soon as he got in there. So, but we give our president dictatorial war powers since 2001. So the Congress and the National Assembly both ceded some of their authority to the executive branch. So you could call Nicolas Maduro a dictator, but the National Assembly ceded that authority as soon as he got into office. Now, there is the OAS, but that's based out of D.C. But the OAS used to have all the members, used to be 35 member nations, now it's just 19 nations are in the OAS, and they voted against Maduro. So that was interesting, but they're based in D.C., so the United Nations is based in D.C. That means it gives the United States so much influence. Mike Pompeo is going to talk to the UN Security Council today, Saturday, January 26th. So it'll be interesting to see the bullshit argument that they got, where they got uranium coming out of Africa, they got weapons of mass destruction. They also have a shit ton of oil, right? That's what these fucking power warmongering sons of bitches, that's all they give a shit about. Now, Nicolas Maduro's regime, his single 6-year term as president of Venezuela, has been marred by several asterisks. So there's several asterisks by his name. He's not a perfect, person. So he assumed powers right after Hugo Chavez died. I thought it would go to the vice president. I think he was the foreign minister at the time. The foreign minister. So that's our State Department, the foreign minister. Do we have a foreign minister? It's not the defense secretary. The foreign minister. Why would the foreign minister? So he took over the presidency and then ran the elections, and he ran in the same elections he was conducting, and then he barely won by 51%. So he got the majority of the vote, but when you're running your own elections, it's a bit conspicuous. He also, after a mostly oppositional government was elected in 2015 elections, so just like America, the president gets elected, and then the president's reactionaries win a shit ton of elections 2 years into their presidency. That happens here in the U.S., it happens in Venezuela. But Maduro, he did something actually pretty phenomenal. He dissolved the Supreme Court, the Supreme Tribunal, whatever the official name is called, the Supreme Tribunal of Justice. So the Supreme Tribunal. He dissolved it. I think there's 5 members, and it's not like our Supreme Court where they get these lifetime appointments, and so they're like ridiculously fucking powerful. They are elected to 2-year terms, and they're elected by the National Assembly. So the National Assembly picks these 5 guys. As soon as Maduro got into office, he just dissolves the Supreme Court, I believe unconstitutionally, because the National Assembly is supposed to elect them, and then he appointed his own on the Supreme Court. And I believe that's the current Supreme Court today that supports him. So he was ruling by presidential decree. He had some quote where he said that there is a separation of powers, but that doesn't necessarily mean division. That could go either way. That could be a great quote for unity, or that could be, the makings of a dictator. Now, Bernie Sanders, he was a little ambiguous. He was a bit ambiguous, but he was clear. His conclusion is, stay out of Venezuela. We got a long history of this shit, so let's not do this. But he had some caveats. So these are the Bernie Sanders caveats. He had said that there was a crackdown on civil society and that millions of immigrants were leaving Venezuela. But Bernie Sanders also said that Maduro had broke the Constitution for dissolving the National Assembly. That is wrong. That is absolutely 100% wrong, because the Constituent Assembly has constitutional power. They got supreme constitutional authority. The Constituent Assembly, their sole function is to produce a constitution. Once they write a brand new constitution, then it goes to a referendum to the people of Venezuela, and then they get to vote on it. That's one of my policy prescriptions. Have a vote on that goddamn Constitution. Either go with the Constitution you got now or go with the new Constitution that this Constituent Assembly, which is made up of 500 to 600 Venezuelans. And so there's only 165 in the National Assembly. So the Constituent Assembly has so much, so many more people inside of it versus the National Assembly. Now, the National Assembly is the Continental Congress of Venezuela. We've had this exact same clash in America. You had the Articles of Confederation, which set up the Continental Congress. Continental Congress would vote amongst themselves for the president, and then that was basically the president of the country. They ran the Revolutionary War, they wrote the Declaration of Independence, then they ran the aftermath. They got the peace and all that shit. We're going to get a constitution in '89. The first Constitutional Convention was in '87. So for 13 years, there is a government that was not being run by the U.S. Constitution that we have today. The current Constitution is the 1789 U.S. Constitution. So once they had George Washington, he had a constitutional convention, and since he was like, a superstar, a rock star, because he convened the Constitutional Convention, the Continental Congress had been pissed. And eventually the Continental Congress is going to get dissolved because of the Constitutional Convention. So this comes down to a people's right to a constitution. Do the people have a right to a constitution? You're goddamn right they do. So the Constituent Assembly needs to finish their constitution. They're supposedly, writing this thing. I'm not for sure what is going on with them. They've taken, kind of dragging their feet, but get this election going. But Bernie Sanders had it wrong, because the Constituent Assembly has supreme constitutional authority. So since they got supreme constitutional authority, and if they believe that their power and their domain is to dissolve the National Assembly because the National Assembly is just being so, against their work, then that makes sense. I think also the Supreme Court said it was okay. There was protest, and then they undid that. So, they threatened to take the authority away from the National Assembly, and I think legally they have the authority to do it because they are writing the Constitution. And if people are fucking with them, hey, I got a right to write this Constitution. I'm doing this shit for my country. Also, the Constituent Assembly is so much bigger, and it's their constitutional convention. Just like George Washington, just like when they got their, just like when we got our U.S. Constitution. Our U.S. Constitution was born out of a Constituent Assembly, just like what Maduro has. So, he got that wrong, so I question his crackdown on civil society and millions of immigrants. Where is he getting his information from? And maybe he doesn't understand government as great as he thought he did. He voted for the war in Somalia. He voted for the war on Syria. There's CIA torture sites in Syria and Yugoslavia, around that area. So, his foreign policy is not perfect. He's mostly a dove, but he's voted to go to war. He also had some Iraq initiative under Clinton. Clinton was bombing bombs over Baghdad, so they were just bombing Baghdad every once in a while for some apparent reason. So, dissolving the National Assembly, I believe, was legal, and more importantly, it's constitutionally protected because they're writing the Constitution, right? So, the clash between the Constituent Assembly and the National Assembly, I think, really marks the crux. The central power struggle is between this Constituent Assembly and this National Assembly. So this is a group of gentlemen. Why can't gentle statesmen craft the Constitution? I also think we should have presidential elections, too, because it's a shit show. It is so fucked right now. It is leaning towards civil war. So, the dam is broke, so something's got to be done. But we don't need to coup d'etat, we don't need to invade, we don't need to use military force whatsoever. Now, Venezuela, they have similarities to the United States government. Venezuela has universal suffrage, so everybody can vote who's over 18 years of age, same as here. There's 3 branches of government that are the same. The president is the executive branch. The president is both the head of state and head of government, just like America. The National Assembly is the legislature, but it's unicameral, not bicameral. And the Supreme Tribunal is the judiciary. It's their Supreme Court. So they got 3 branches, the same 3 branches of government that we have is the same 3 branches of government they have, only the exception being the elections branch, the National Election Council. So the National Election Council has its own branch of government. It's a powerhouse, Those people get to run the elections however they see fit. And elections in a democracy are crucial. Their 2018 presidential election had 49% of the vote. And I want to say the Constituent Assembly had 42% of the vote. But that's way higher than many elections in America. Like I said before, if you got 1% of the vote, that's enough. That's all you need to. We don't do redos in America. Boycott the election or not, if the Democrats want to sit out, then the Democrats will let the Republicans run shit now. So, that's America. So, for anybody saying, well, they didn't have a high enough turnout rate, I agree with you. We need 51% to make sure it's the democratically legitimate. But we don't even listen to that rule, so we can't sit there and say that they didn't have a high enough turnout when we don't redo our elections, when our turnout rate is under 50%. So the boycott election, I think, the opposition boycotted the election, so they said that it was Jimmy Carter. He said that Venezuela had one of the best election systems ever. So I'm going to go with Jimmy Carter on this, and assuming that they, basically just got 2 factions, 2 groups of people. So when they run the elections, depending on if it's pro-Maduro or opposition, then people will be crying foul. But that's just a bunch of sour grapes. Juan Guaido, you weren't elected president. Quit fucking crying and get back to the legislature. Juan Guaido, you're not the president of Venezuela. No, you are not. You are the president of the legislative branch, which is elected amongst you guys, 165 or so. But you weren't elected by the Venezuelan people. How the fuck are you going to call yourself the president when you were an elected president? Hillary's got more of a claim to the presidency than Juan Guaido does. So their legislature is unicameral, ours is bicameral. We don't do redos. The difference is we got 3 branches of government, they got 4, and then the Supreme Court. Their Supreme Court is a lot different than ours too, because the Supreme Court is appointed by the Venezuelan legislature for 2-year terms. In America, our Supreme Court is nominated by the executive and then confirmed by the Senate. So the legislature in Venezuela, the National Assembly, gets to elect the Supreme Court magistrates, I think is what they call them, justices here, but they're nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. So Trump was able to get 2 in our Supreme Court. We got 9 Supreme Court justices. We got 1 chief, 8 associates, 5 Republican presidents were Republicans that nominated them, and 4 were nominated by Democrats. So essentially, we have a conservative Supreme Court. 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Neil Gorsuch. So Neil Gorsuch, Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, Samuel Alito, Stephen Breyer, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Brett Kavanaugh, Clarence Thomas, John Roberts is the Chief Justice. So those are the 9 Supreme Court justices of the United States. So there's some similarities, there's some differences. There were some asterisks next to Maduro's name, but ultimately, unless I'm on the ground, unless I'm actually looking at the thing, unless I can feel the effects of all this, it seems like it's just oppositional. It's an internal matter. We have no business deciding this internal matter amongst the Venezuelan people. This is up to the Venezuelan people. What do the Venezuelan people want? If they tolerate a dictator that put up a constituent assembly to write the Constitution, this is what I think needs to happen. You need to go ahead, Venezuela, listen up. Venezuela, you need to get the Constituent Assembly assembled and write your fucking Constitution, finish your damn job, and then the National Assembly, get them to administer the vote on it. You know, you got the Electoral Council, but the National Assembly gets to vote on the Supreme Court and the National Electoral Council, which I don't know if they're allowed to do or if he's still appointing people. So if they need to vote for new election branch leaders, that's okay. Let the National Assembly set up the election branch, and then the election branch goes ahead and has this referendum. We're going to need 2 elections, 2 referendums, because it is a civil war. So get the Constitution approved or disapproved, so that way we know which Constitution we're even listening to, the old one or the new one. And then if the new one is passed, or even if the old one has failed, I think it would be smart to have a presidential election and have it being run by some third non-biased party. So get, I don't know, Argentina, Brazil, or I guess they're kind of, everybody's showing their asses, right? So get the people that are, get the European Union. The European Union didn't pick a side. The European Union said we just need new elections. And they're 100% right. So get the European Union to run the elections, and then vote on the new president. So vote for your Constitution, then vote for your president. In 2 elections, you can run 2 elections, one in June and then one in December, and this entire matter with Venezuela will be resolved by the year's end. So there is a peaceful way forward. Getting referendums there, they can administer it themselves. I think the United States government needs to take a back burner to this. We have a history of intervening into Latin, Central, South America, and they don't want us there. So we can, let's assume, okay, let's just go ahead and just assume the worst, right? Either by coup d'etat or outright invasion. If we attempt a coup d'etat, this could turn into a Bay of Pigs. You try to get some special forces in there, and then they kill all the special forces, and now, because they killed soldiers, well, we got to declare war with our entire military. So it's very, you know, you got to be very careful about getting entangled in foreign entanglements, right? So if the U.S. government get their way, they're going to do kind of like an Operation Restored Democracy like they did with Aristide in Haiti. And they're going to act like they're the ones that claim democracy and freedom, and they know the, you know, government of Venezuela best, and they're going to go in there by military force. They're going to go in there by military force, they're going to go ahead and kick Nicolas Maduro out, and then they're going to install Juan Guaido. I don't see how the Venezuelan people could accept that. I don't see how the Venezuelan people who did not elect Juan Guaido, I don't see how he wasn't elected by the people. He has no, how can he claim to be the leader of all, because he doesn't even, he only, you know, has 1 of 5 branches, or 4 branches. depending on if you consider the military and the oil company. So that's what America wants. We hate that they're socialist. Our government hates that they're socialist. Our government realizes they have a shit ton of oil, which gives them lots of economic leverage all across the world. I remember Hugo Chavez gave us heating oil. So when the American government couldn't even warm up their own people, Venezuela was giving out free heating oil for the people who needed it. So that's incredible. That's amazing. I remember when Hugo Chavez gave that book, Bleeding Veins, to Barack Obama, and Barack Obama just acted like a dick, and Barack Obama had, overturned Honduras, so he had a coup d'etat on his record. So we weren't friendly with Venezuela, even with a leftist Democratic president. So if we get what we want, right, which is to put Juan Guaido, an unelected person installed by a foreign power, into Venezuela, are we going to have presidential elections, or are we just going to force Juan Guaido down the throats of the Venezuelan people? Whether they like him or not, we're just going to force him on them. And then once he's a U.S. puppet, right, because he's going to always be friendly to the U.S. for, giving him the presidency. So as soon as we topple their government, install our puppet, you think the Venezuelan people will put up with that shit? Would you put up with that shit? Pick a country, any fucking country. Let's say Canada decides to go ahead and put Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as president. And for some reason, she's elected to the head of the legislature. She's the Speaker House. And the American government, President Trump just won't step down. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez goes to Canada, and Canada protects her, and she's a superstar over there. And Canada protects her and says, hey, America, you're going to put Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the office. I love Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think Tulsi Gabbard or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Andrew Yang, these would be some badass fucking presidents. You want to make great America greater again, you would elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez president. If she's old enough. I think she's only 30 years old, so she's going to be legislating and causing, she's going to build up an entire army, and for the next 5 years, she's just going to be, kicking ass and taking names. So, even if they installed a foreign government, Canada, put Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as president, I guess it really depends on it. I could go either way on it, to be honest, because that is who I want to be in there, but I feel like I'm mostly opposed to it, like 99% opposed to it, because that government which is installed by a foreign government, that government which is won by coup d'etat, has no legitimacy. They can be deposed by coup d'etat, and it never ends. It never ends. So if that happened, what if Canada all of a sudden doesn't like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and then picks somebody else and installs them, which they've already shown precedent that they did once. So even though I like her, and me thinking of a world as her, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at the helm, just let me take a second, let me breathe, because that would be amazing, that would be incredible. The tactics which would have got her elected president, unless she's elected by the American people in a normal general election every 4 years. We have these fucking things. We've been doing this shit for 200-something years. We essentially made the world a bunch of fucking democracies, right? So this is the American experiment. Can the people run themselves? So ultimately, I wouldn't want that to happen. I would not want that to happen. I don't want fucking Canada to pick my leader for me. I'm going to pick my leader. We're all going to pick the leaders of our own country. That's how it should happen. And so it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Just reverse the roles. If you wouldn't want Canada to invade your country and get a coup d'etat and install some other, puppet regime, because of course they're going to be friendly to Canada since they just got power from Canada. And the Canadians are still British. They got the Queen on their money, right? We tried to make them Americans, but they didn't want to become Americans. Instead, they burnt down our White House. They burnt down our fucking White House. The Canadians did. So we're going to allow the Canadians to fuck with our presidency like that? They burnt down our White House once. I don't feel like we should ever take that kind of bullshit ever again. What the fuck? That's a pretty big disaster that day. That was not a victory for the U.S. when the White House was burned down. So there you go. That's my essentially